God bless. This is Anthony DiBello again. And I'm leaving a eulogy, or giving a eulogy, continuing in this even more unique and unusual way, which, as I mentioned in the previous eulogy, I am a carbon copy of my dad, for better or for worse. But let me go back to the beginning of Holy Scriptures, where I started before, and also talk about how original sin came onto this planet. And the man, he was alone with the animals, and God had commanded him to be fruitful and multiply. And the man knew he couldn't do it with the animals, so God, from the rib of the man, created woman. So the primacy to that is eternally important, because not only was the woman tempted and tricked by the devil, she disobeyed and thus tricked and tempted the man. So ultimately, in a way, it's the man's fault, because when the woman approached, he should have just said no. But he didn't, because it's one thing to need somebody to give seed or egg, as it were, to multiplying and sorry again for the lighting, but multiplying and making the planet more fruitful. But it's also for loneliness, and the scripture says you want one like yourself. So what I was speaking to about primacy, this is all scriptural, there's an instinctual characteristic in a being that's a second being, in the line of creation, to either have I'll call it an urge to submit to the leader, or the instinction to empower themselves to overtake the leader. First they'll empower, then they'll become equal with the leader, then they'll try to overpower the leader. Now, certainly God created human beings with inspiration and motivation to empower themselves. But up to the point where you need to become or should become submissive in servitude, not in a negative way, but submit to the leader. I mean, all human beings are creations of God who are supposed to follow God. Now, without getting lengthy into the spiritual and biblical side, but the first angel ever created was the devil. He was God's number one angel. He was the first angel. And rather than submit and serve God, the devil tried to overpower God and not only be like God, but eventually he would have overpowered God, because once you're committing one evil, it's, you continue along that progression. So God was intolerant of that. Even the first commandments, thou shalt have no gods before me. And that's why the devil was kicked out of heaven. Not only after the devil was kicked out, the devil took pride in what he had done. And the scripture says from the beginning, the devil is the father of lies and of theft. He's a stealer and he's a liar, a thief. So that's the nature of evil, right? You look at for example, in the garden, the first sons of Adam and Eve, one was a farmer and one was a shepherd. I mean, that's really what it's all about, the earth and the animals, right? Taking care of them. And then, of course, each other. But Cain killed Abel, and mankind is, of course, that's of evil of the devil. And mankind has had original sin and trick and temptation and entrapment since the beginning of creation. Now, that instinctual first and second primacy that I mentioned, that just doesn't go for the angels in heaven as it did with God. It does so with man and God. Okay? Now remember, I'm still eulogizing my daddy here. Okay? But it also relates to man and woman. The female is supposed to follow the man, not overtake and overpower and then destroy the man. We can look at it even in family members. Firstborn family member and then the secondborn family member has to make a decision. Do I come in service to the one who was here before me, or do I try to overpower and equal and then overtake? Again, there's nothing wrong with that, to the point where you should be pushing each other to succeed, but still, if you want to put it that way, you'll still keep the order. Now, as it relates to eulogizing my dad, as I picked up from where I left off after the death of my mother, you could see, I still remember a Christmas picture, the void in our lives without our mom there, because you realize later, as you see in families, that you think the dad is the leader. In some ways, the mom is. But my mom pushed my dad and made my dad better. That's why he was so successful in family and faith and finances. Faith first, then family, then finances. And then every other aspect. And then when my mother died, of course my dad was lonely. And even, and I mentioned in the other eulogy, in the Italian tradition, men used to cheat on their wives. They'd have mistresses. My dad never did anything like that, ever. But they have, in addition to being vulnerable, as a man, their masculinity is, suffers. So that's when, and I've, documented a lot of this, but I'm going to get this to, as it pertains to eulogizing my dad in town, to his funeral and his burial, and this day, which again I'm recording on the same day of the other eulogy, and the details of how my vulnerable dad was met by a woman. And there's a lot of ways to die in this creation. I mean, natural disasters, by your own hand, a lot of ways. But from the beginning of the time, the devil, and it's not to say all women, you get a good woman, you grow the planet, but you get a bad woman or an evil woman, and one again who is full of deceit and thievery, you will be destroyed. So when this woman who, Donna, her name was, approached my father wanting to meet the wealthy widower, you didn't need to know much more than that. Now, how do I know that? Because in the last 2 or 3 years of my dad's life, and I can't give the exact dates because of some legality that you'll hear about later here, but my dad told me everything. We talked about everything, and I've never known, I know my mom never lied to me, ever, not once. My dad, as I just relayed to somebody, has never lied to me up until maybe about 10 years ago, maybe 15. He told what would be called a white lie. I'm not sure why he did it. It wasn't intended, I don't think, to hurt me, but he knew about it, I knew about it. He said he was sorry. I forgave him. But it was in the nature of either protecting somebody or, like you would see it in a movie again, referencing a movie, that you kind of have to tell it or somebody's going to get hurt or, worse. And then other than that, my dad never lied until his life got really bad at the end, and I'll describe. He said he had to lie to this Donna about 5 times maybe to protect or see me. I even said, Dad, we got to find a way to do it without you lying. I don't want you lying. But he was, and I'll get to this, how his life ended. Other than that, my father never lied. Never. My father was one of the most supremely intelligent men with a great memory, incredibly loving, truthful, as I mentioned. I mean, you live 91 years, you know, to tell maybe 5 lies, 6 lies in your life. I mean, that's pretty incredulous was a word my father liked to use. Pretty, God bless him, incredible. So he meets this Donna, and I've documented how I was against it from the beginning. Now, the first reason I was against it was obvious. You people, I hope, can understand, was natural and sort of not necessarily jealousy, but, who could replace my mom type of thing. You know what I mean? And it's, you'd want to protect your dad. You want to, I didn't think this way back then, but you'd maybe even think, well, maybe, our beloved Lots, her nickname was a precursor for, a preeminent for somebody better, okay? Or predecessor, I'm sorry, for somebody better. But no, there's also the version of there's good and evil on this planet. For every good, there's an evil. For every wedding, there's a funeral. For every birth, there's a death. You know what I mean? And I know I didn't say that properly, so I apologize. But immediately, I was against my father being with this woman. Certainly, I'd have to give her a chance because my father was still the leader and I submitted to him. And, I wanted my dad. I knew he was lonely. I wanted him to continue to, my dad loved life. He wanted to be joyful and happy and help people and have, still lead his family. But after that brief thought of, not brief, I knew for the rest of my life, I said, this woman will never replace my mother. Never. Not even in the same class of human being as my mother, because even if it wasn't my mom, this woman, I could sense evil in her. And I wasn't as spiritual nearly then as I am now. And I knew there was evil in her. It was pretty obvious, and my dad even said, she was 21 years his junior. She's going to be after his money. She asked to meet the wealthy widower. My dad confessed to me, and now I can openly share it, that she, under false pretenses, came into his office under the guise of wanting to have a Bible study. And a lot of times those are the least godly people you can trust, the ones who tell you that they're a Christian. It's like Dr. Stanley said, and my dad and I talked about it, the devil doesn't come up to you with a bloody knife and say he's going to kill you. You'd avoid it. You'd be smart enough. No, what he does is he comes up to you behind your back as a loved one, hugs you, and stabs you in the back. So, and I'm sure I've documented a lot of this, but I'll try to keep it toward eulogizing my beloved dad. One of the first actions of this woman with regards to me was to have me falsely arrested. She did it to empower herself, because again, there's that empowering to overpower. The second is she had a great amount of financial motivation from the beginning. My dad never was with her without her first being hired. She was first hired as a secretary, and then my dad bequeathed and didn't bequeath, I shouldn't use that word. She benefited from every way financially from my father. He told me, he said, Mark, she never paid for anything. Never, ever. He paid every dinner out, every trip, every vacation. She never paid for a thing. So, and I'm sure, knowing my dad, she didn't pay for his birthday gifts either, that he would have bought him, which is what he did even with my mom, Dorothy, money was low on my mom's list. My mom knew the right way to do things. You work, you love each other, God blesses you financially, which was happening. You don't go in, money first. But my father would buy like a birthday present, give it to my mom, and say, can you give this to me on my birthday? You know what I mean? But I don't doubt that this new woman person did that with my dad, and gladly did it because she wasn't using any of her money to do it. She didn't have money. My father did tell me that she, a short time after they were married, her previous husband, and he believes she might have had more than one. Her previous husband, I don't know, I can't find the facts anywhere, but the previous husband died. He was a gun expert, died under circumstances where she was alone in the kitchen with him, and the next thing you know, they call it an accident and her husband's dead. But apparently, according to my dad, she confessed to my dad a couple times, once used it as a threat that she could end up doing the same thing to my dad. My dad also said he saw paperwork or a news story on it, and there was an older news story that she and her sister Ann killed the man by throwing him off the 9-story building. I don't know if it was a boyfriend. My father talked about it, a few times and at great detail. And he wasn't mentally ill about it. He wasn't suffering from Alzheimer's about it. He wasn't suffering from dementia, and I know he wasn't lying. Why would he lie? He has no reason to lie. If he was telling me these stories, which I'll go on to some of them, as to, if they were deceitful, you only have to ask yourself a couple things. Who's more likely to be lying? Me and my dad? Who's more likely to be me and mentally ill and demented? Me and my dad, or this one woman who, and anybody can tell you in criminal justice, you want to know where the crime is? Follow the money. So having said that, my dad told me, well, she confessed to it. He had evidence. And she also inflated life insurance policies and benefits a short time before the man passed to profit from his death. And she also did it, quote unquote, for my dad to clear a path to him. Now, when I talk about the times I've spoken with my dad, I have, I call it evidentiary, if you want to call it that. One, I have his telling me things. 2 is things I've researched. 3 is things he's researched. He's had evidence. 4 is the fact that there were times he's left his phone off the hook by accident when he got older, near to his dying day. And I heard what happened between them. I mean, I could hear the altercations and the arguments, and I could also hear a description and sound effects like knives and things to that effect. So, and I'll get to that. So, after my dad telling me they got married and her doing the false arrest, and again, she lied. I didn't steal a truck. I mean, who says that about somebody? I could have been killed. I was in jail for 6 days. And then when I asked her twice after that, and I've said this before, so I won't belabor the point, to apologize or asked if she wanted to, she said, no, I'll do it again because you and your father need to know who's the boss and who's going to own all of this one day. And she said multiple things like that through the course of her life with my dad. So I knew, and I told my dad, I said, Dad, you will lose everything to this woman. Everything one day. I hate to tell you that. I love you. And I fought against it because I could feel, my goodness, especially when I became very spiritual and logistically, I'll use that word, clean and sober, about 33 years ago, 1991. So I said, Dad, and I understand, you fall in love, you get, there's a psychological term called love bombing, which my father actually used. He said he was love bombed. I didn't teach him that. And that, and you're vulnerable and, when you have a lot of money and you have all the blessings and talents and gifts that my dad has, people will be, loving to you, nice to you, whether it's, valid or not. But you could tell, what a person is really like when it gets down to the end or when the money runs out, put it that way, okay, or what their sole inspiration is or their MO or their motivation. I'm using MO because things that were done to me, and I know my dad during the course of his lifetime by this person, were criminal, period. We were the victims, my dad and I. So I fought with my dad. Always didn't fight with him per se. I mean, I tried to tell him the truth and say, Dad, here's, what's, keep an eye on this. When you sell one part of your house, you're going to end up, a house divided cannot stand. And sure enough, he sold one part of the house. He started renting it. No, he sold the property, then another property, then I think a third property. The house started getting divided. Then the rooms upstairs got divided. I said, it's just crumbling. This, one of his nephews used the word, or second nephews used the word empire. It just started crumbling. And I was trying to fight for good the whole time with my dad. And a lot of times my dad would stand up against me and say, no, you're wrong, Mark. You need to understand she's a good person. She never tells a lie. I love her. He wouldn't usually really use the word love ever. I don't think he used. He just said, you got to be nice to her. But, eventually, right from the very start of their union, their marriage, which I didn't attend because I knew, and I tried to always avoid the person. I just didn't She wasn't very likable to me. Of course, I loved and have to honor my dad, but I just didn't find her very likable, truthful. She had no class, no charisma. She just was, you could tell she was just kind of, I don't know, for lack of better expression, you don't want to use in a eulogy thought, so I'll think of something else. But she was just placating my dad. She was just acting, in a sense. You could just tell she wasn't, just didn't have a lot of depth, other than, devilish depth. So I don't know, they were together 30-something years, 35 maybe, but every 5 years, you could just mark it by this, 7 5-year blocks in a row. Everything in my dad's life began to disintegrate and divide. And I've said this before, whether it was his family, and she gave birth to no children, his finances, they all dwindled to nothing at the time of his passing. His business legacy, gone. He had a clean criminal record. Got involved in a nonprofit called Bingo City. I didn't get involved, thank God. I knew what was going to happen. Sure enough, everybody got implicated except for her. Okay? And my dad even said to me, he said, Mark, I had to protect her. He said I was protecting somebody, but I knew that because his son Joe got in trouble, who would have been the only other person he would have protected. Well, he would have protected everybody, my dad. But that goes to show you who he was protecting. And I know it in his voice when he told me. And I could see why, because I tried to do business later in life with my dad that I waited 20 years to do after Bingo City, do it legally, do it fairly, and she got involved and basically stole the money from me and my dad. And my dad was, vehemently angry about it. Nothing he could do at that point. He was only getting weaker, and I'll tell you about that. But I was like, I didn't want to involve her, but she controlled everything in my father's life, every form of communication, everything. So again, with those other things I was mentioning, no family, caused him to get a felony in Bingo City, no business legacy, and then and no, finances gone, and then his mental capacity. Now, I've studied things at length, and I am, thank God, 100 times smarter than this woman will ever be, and more studied. And I know, and some people out there, God bless them. Everybody's got talents and abilities, but I know mine, and I know how much I loved and studied my dad. So I said, Dad, and when he started to get, first, my dad is a lifelong hypochondriac, but he started to get over that. Okay, so whatever somebody had, my dad wanted to have. He also did it because he wanted to bear other people's pain. And I know it's deeply spiritual and psychological, but his oldest brother, Mark John, the strongest guy in his family, other than the strength my dad had, but sort of an old-fashioned man's man, he had Alzheimer's. But he had a legitimate physical version of it. My father, I could tell there was some version of his Alzheimer's. It didn't seem, not that he had Alzheimer's, he didn't. But what he would think of as forgetfulness, and certainly it was constantly reinforced to him. But it wasn't forgetfulness. It was just he didn't know things, and I thought it was a part of codependency. Like people can be addicted to other people, but it's also what's called trauma bonding. And what happened is my father just started emptying his brain to this woman. He was trusting her with everything. He'd have to ask her he started slowly. He did it once. What time is it? Then he'd ask her twice a day. What time is it? Then he'd end up asking her 20 times a day. I'm like, Dad, look for yourself. And she was, with this codependency, if a person is codependent on another person, it's mutual. But so his codependency was loneliness. My father would get incredibly lonely. He's a very social being. Probably started out sexual. That's the way a lot of these things start. So those things my dad was dependent on, she had to be dependent on something, and it was obvious. It was money. She didn't fall short of saying that when they first met. And it was evidenced because she kept getting it. And if you looked at a scale, the better the treatment my father got, the more money he had. As he started to lose his money to her and the scales tipped, whereby my father's wealth was lower than hers, she started to treat him less poorly, which tells you that's the barometer. That was the reason she was with him, to how, the money he could provide, and then the power she started to get and usurp. So my dad saw it. And he started to see it, and he started to realize. And then, of course, I went, and she had me once arrested before. My dad had said something. He went back on it. She changed his mind. I mean, when she began to, and again, my dad was happy to, kind of, I don't want to call it a Cinderella story, but my dad had that, it's not even a complex. It's something that I have too. You want to help, the downtrodden poor woman or Cinderella. You want to be a knight in shining armor. Well, this woman wasn't as poor and destitute when she first met my father, although I saw where she was first from in Rensselaer. It was a terrible, kind of a slum place. But like I said, my dad later told me that how she benefited from insurance policies. And, these are his words. I didn't put these words in his mouth, and thankfully I recorded them. And like I said, those are what I have, as testimonies, things I've heard, things he's told me, things I've witnessed for myself that anybody can see. And messages he's left. So none of this is a lie or fabrication. None of it. There's no reason for it to be. So having said that, let's get to basically the last 2 or 3 years of my dad's life. Well, after he told me this is about 8 years ago, I guess. He told me he was going to sell the house. And I said, well, I went to try to save it. It was just a matter of time before that was going to happen. She wanted it sold. She wanted the money. He was getting older. Next thing you know, house was gone. I was so distraught. I mentioned this before. I had this suicidal episode where all I wanted to do was hang myself on the rope, some rope dangling in the barn. Whether it was there done on purpose, I don't know. But I don't know. But it was on, I think, the day of their anniversary when I was trying to have a garage sale and do other things up at the house and not claim my belongings, but try to help my dad or discuss it, that he threw money in my face and she said for me to get off the property. And my dad did, and I was heartbroken. And I couldn't talk to him for 4 years. I was partially angry with him that he'd let that happen because my dad adored that house. He was up there 50 years. He built it with his bare hands, practically, me and him. I remember standing on a rock pile and his second son, Joseph, dropping a rock on my head as we built the house. But, the fondest of memories, I adored that house. My father loved it. It was his house. But, of course, I said, just a matter of time, and sure enough, the house gets sold. So I didn't talk to my dad for 4 years. He has to rent now in East Greenbush, which he hated. He hated. My dad renting, he worked his life not to rent. And she wanted to move there to be closer to her kids and do her thing. And, of course, they're starting to grow apart. And as they're growing apart also, she's gaining more and more control over him and more control over his mind. And I looked up the form of abuse. It's called perspecticide. Now, it's not Alzheimer's. What it is, it's brainwashing. It's the same thing that happens to somebody who's in a cult or a prisoner of war. And the same with the dementia, a form of dementia, because there's a form of dementia brought on by abuse. It's not Alzheimer's dementia as you would think in the medical sense. It's a brainwashing. It's a difference, and I told my dad this, and he understood later. There's a difference between forgetting something and not knowing something. You know what I mean? If somebody doesn't tell me where the knife is in the drawer, and I say, "Where's the knife?" It's because I don't know. It's not because I forgot. But my father was reinforced by them negatively, and when I say them, Donna and all the females in my father's family, one less than all the others, but who was unsure about Donna, let's say, but all the others were completely duped by her. And because they have that empowerment issue, okay? And some are just ungodly, some are just not that intelligent. I mean, some just don't love my dad the way I do. I mean, they were duped. So she started working on his brain, and she knew what she was doing. My father called 25 times a day. She tried to pick up 25 times, not in a good way to respond to him, but to manipulate, to work, to keep this trauma bond going. So sure enough, my father's mind starts to deteriorate. Now with me, it wasn't nearly as bad. He talked lucidly about things from 70 years ago in his teens and 20s. And I know this same sensation because his second-born son, Joseph, has a tendency to bully me a little bit, verbally berate and demean and be a bit abusive. And where I try to be strong-minded and strong-willed around other people and normally can be, as soon as somebody puts you down when you first speak with them, you begin to cower. You begin to not just cower, which means fear, but you begin to lose, a sense of security, or your own self-esteem is probably the best expression for it. And it happens. And I know that feeling. And it weakens you. And eventually my father, again, he began to, and there is also a natural forgetfulness. And my dad and I talked about all the time. For the life that my dad lived at 91, he lived 2 lifetimes, basically. So you forget things after essentially 182 years. So he and I talked about this at length. So what happened was, apparently he had enough, because after moving from East Greenbush, they had to move, she wanted to move to Schenectady for financial reasons, to be even closer to her family. And she was always after money one way or another. I heard it, I saw it, I witnessed it. Thankfully, well, not thankfully, but to her, would, I guess, call it credit for now. His wealthy Joe DiBello, my father's wealthy son, started to become very wealthy, which benefited and prospered her. And she also had Joseph duped, because Joey does not believe in God, which means either one, you believe you're God, or two, the devil's going to have you believing in somebody or something else. And Joey, to his credit for some of the good things in him, his God essentially is the same God as hers, money. And they talk in a language of business. That's the people who are successful. That's the people you want to, like my father uses the term, rub elbows with. And they have the same kind of mindset. And I know she could dupe Joey, because Joey's been duped by those kind of women, just like I used to be, until, I became more spiritual and realized that, what, there's a way God created women to be, like my mom. That's the way a woman's supposed to be, like my mom's sisters, most of them, if not all of them, except, however, I'm speaking of one that also sometimes fell under this Donna's charismatic control. And it's not that she's charismatic. My dad and I use the same words, cunning and crafty. And those are Dad's words, not mine. So having said that, as his mind began to weaken and he became physically older and financially enslaved, because if she controls all the finances, she eats, and is the only one who knows how to cook, because that's the one thing domestic thing my dad really couldn't do is cook. He's under her control. He's really essentially enslaved and a captive. He's got to eat what she feeds him. He's got to eat the quality of food she feeds him. She controls the banking. She, ultimately, and that's, it's really essentially a cult. And that's why I've entitled a lot of this, and even this is supposed to be in eulogy form, whatever form that may be. It's a cult of not just one, but a cult of at least 4 or 5, because his daughters, who my father disliked at the time of his death, he spoke disparagingly about many of them, and I don't blame him. So having said that, and this isn't going the way I want to go, and maybe I'll record it again, but I think I'll just leave it, because just even talking about this woman she's the most devilish human being I've ever met in my life. And here's where people don't realize how the devil works. One of the great things, not great things, but the most evil thing the devil does is with regards to deception. If I told you to go into the ocean or something, and I said, oh no, the ocean isn't wet, it's sandy. And I don't know, sand, that's not a good example. If you said like the grass is green, and I told you, no, it's pink, you'd know I was lying. That's pretty obvious. But the bigger way the devil deceives is if you ask me if the grass is green, and I say, yeah, it's green, and you don't believe me. You see what I'm saying? Meaning, like, I'm telling the truth, like my dad is telling the truth, and people don't believe us. Or they believe somebody else. Okay? They're misled to believe, somebody who is, if you're devilish, you're going to believe in the devil. If you're evil, you're going to believe evil. And you're going to be deceived. And that's another thing. And I used to tell my dad all the time, and he understood. I told him, I said, Dad, there's many a great man before you. John the Baptist had his head cut off because of some woman's daughter who did a strip show. King David, lost what he had because of Bathsheba. There isn't, Samson because of, with Delilah. There's not a great and godly man that hasn't been attacked and killed by a woman. Now, I'm not saying this woman killed my father. I'm just saying, I'll go on. Okay, that's just an expression. So, I said, Dad, and the other thing again with deception, I said, Dad, if you knew it was a lie, you wouldn't have fallen for it, right? That's what deception is. You basically are lied. So lied to, and then, someday you might find the truth. So like I said, about 3 years ago when they moved to Schenectady, my father, just the light came on, if you want to put it that way. He saw how much his life was diminished. He hated his life. And what he had told me was, she began to strike him, which isn't surprising when it comes to abuse. Of course, she's going to deny it. And I've had occasion to call a couple of times the police for domestic violence things when my dad was begging me when she first started, because I'd hear her verbally browbeat him. I heard her swear at him, deny him money, deny him food. I mean, I've had these things on recording. I heard the way she treated him. So I called once when there was some violence going on. Now remember, she's 21 years younger than my dad. My dad uses a walker or cane. He's not a violent man anyways. I never saw my dad ever swing a punch at anybody. Never, ever, ever, ever. And he never, like I told you about him lying, never. Like I had mentioned in that way with her, I've seen her lie. I've witnessed it. Lie to the point of throwing somebody in jail. So my dad, as I was saying, I called the police. I got a copy of I did it like 2 or 3 times because he asked me to. Then he stopped there. We stopped doing it because the police didn't do anything. They believed her, which isn't surprising. And I saw these spiritual forces were like, this is unbelievable. This woman's like Teflon Donna, okay, which is a name I put on her now. But I don't want to even discuss her because she's just evil. And you're going to see it. You saw it. And I can't believe I'm not crying now. I'm trying to just get this out in the time I have left to speak here. But when the police report, I read the police report, it was completely opposite of what I heard happen. My dad told me happened. She said my dad attacked her. Here's what people do, especially when they're evil, and it's done to me. They'll throw a rock at somebody, and then they'll hide behind the monitor, like if you're in a schoolyard, and say, oh, that person threw a rock at me. They'll lie, and then they'll say, well, you got to protect me. And then they'll start, berating the other person. The other person's the criminal. And that's just what this police report read like. My father, attacked her, did this, did that. Now, again, I know he would sometimes try to stand up for himself. He wouldn't initiate it. My dad was a peaceful man. He doesn't have people falsely arrested. He doesn't lie. You think he wants to jeopardize his own life and let alone his son? This woman is getting everything from him, financially, powerfully, controlling all the material, his banking, his phone use, everything. And her number one enemy was me, because I knew from the beginning, and certainly as time went on, and the more spiritual and godly I became, the more I want the truth to be told, the more it would cost her financially, although it didn't cost her because I ended up sending my father money, which she took. She knew she was going to have to, do something to, again, stop me. So in the course of after I stopped calling the police, because again, the police can be easily deceived. They're 90% of them are ungodly, evil-minded people, despite what you might have grew up believing, which I was told always, respect the police. They're always good. You always hear that. That's not true. That's not true. It's just not true, especially with regards to the spirituality part of it. So after many discussions on a lot of things, and this story is pretty, I put it out there as my dad asked me to. He gave me three basic requests when he died. He said, one, tell my story. 2 is, I know because, the words I hear in my dad's head today are, I want to be alive and I want to be happy, because he wasn't. He was depressed and miserable over what had happened to him. And he just wanted the truth to be told and justice to be done. So my dad, said we determined to just get him out of there because we're not violent men. Actually, my dad wanted to see her jailed. I've recorded his messages. We talked about that. My dad, again, he told me that she started to cheat on him. He's seen her with other men. Their basic day, near the last years of his life, 2 or 3 years, was they'd wake up, eventually, I guess, in separate bedrooms, separate beds. She'd leave a plate of food in the morning, go off all day, so he could reheat it for lunch. And of course, Then he was left alone, rattling around in the house, with getting lonelier, with less people, less friends. There was one male friend I know that he had. Another came in who was a pastor, who I believe was probably more of a friend of this woman Donna's. My dad began to distrust Donna more, as I knew he should have, because his life kept getting worse. And then she would go out and go on vacation, spend his money. He couldn't get the money. I heard her berate him, swear at him, wouldn't let him do things like he'd like to do, football, basketball. It was quintessential just domestic violence, spousal abuse. There's no doubt about it. I mean, again, I've got recordings, overheard conversations that were recorded. Dad leaving me messages, testimony, our phone conversations. Why would he lie? I'm not have any reason to lie. She was getting all the money anyway. My father, and he did once say, goes, how did he say? He said, my dad always said, Mark says, don't say go. Is that, why would he be lying? What did he stand to have, to gain? It had to be some way or another a cry for help, what they say. I mean, it's the truth. You either want to, either those things are happening or they're not. So, I heard them, so I know they were happening. So we determined just to get him out of there. I said, Dad, success is the best revenge. We'll get you out of there. We'll live together. Joey has finances. I have finances. I would come into some money later. I'm like, Pop, we'll be okay. And he begged to do that, and I begged to do it. And we looked forward to it. We talked about it often, and we tried to do it. Now, on the day, I want to say, and it's recorded, September 14th, 2022 maybe, she knew about all of this. So the thing she had to do, and my father knows and agrees, the thing she feared the most was divorce. Because through divorce, she would not only lose, I termed it the golden goose would lose, the gold digger would lose the golden goose, but my father would have power of attorney. He could then get some of his money back, which he wanted. It wasn't my idea. It was his idea. I said, Dad, let's just move on. But she knows that if she didn't have, again, because you have to have the power, the control, the cult-like power and control, the coerciveness, and the money. So she filed this false protection order against me, saying I was a violent and dangerous threat to her and my father. Absurd. She did it. She didn't tell my dad. She did it against his knowledge. She certainly didn't tell me. The stuff she filed was completely fraudulent and false and fictitious. Completely. I mentioned this, the story. I never got to, respond to the case because it was filed in default. I didn't know about it. It came in a spam call. Apparently that was me supposed to be in court. The judge said it's spam, wrong number. It's all recorded. So I've been fighting that order for 2 years since it got done. And if my dad, like in one instance, I called him out, I think it was his 89th birthday, and the judge said, well, we can understand that. We'll let it go. It was his birthday. Nope, not the petitioner. That's what she's called in the case. She said, nope, throw him in jail. He broke the order. And the punishment in the jail would be a death sentence to me, because I've been to jail falsely because of them, especially if they're falsely. I've been there deservedly a time or two. I've only probably been in jail 4 or 5 times in my life, nothing more than 10 days, for drinking and drug, driving. But it's a heck of a lot more painful, a hell of a lot more painful when you're in there and you're innocent, and your father's suffering on the outside even more. But, the innocent being put in jail, you don't want to be, again, like the situation in the barn. You're suicidal. So I'm like, my dad was like, it's ridiculous, he would say. He goes, this protection order thing is ridiculous. He actually had to go to court once is when he first found out about it. Because finally, after about a year, I, filed an order. Well, I won't get into all the details, but they were into court together. And he said, let's drop it. And she said, she had to drop it. Just that one time, that violation part of it. But continued the whole thing because, again, if my father divorced her, she would lose power of control. She would lose the money. Okay? So that's what she was fighting against, because she and my dad knew it, and he cried about it. He said, he begged. He just wanted to get away from her. He wanted to live. He was afraid for his life. He told me he believed he was being, and I've heard part of it. I know he was getting knives thrown at him. I heard how she threatened him with, deadly destruction. In the end, he started to believe he was going to be poisoned. Not that going to be, because she was doping him. He told me testimony. I don't even want to use that in like a league court sense, where her physician's assistant daughter was giving him medication, and she's not legally allowed to do that. I tried calling APS. They came over. My father said she gave the woman money, the APS girl, a young, overweight black girl. My father wasn't going to respond to anyway. Gave the girl money. Girl walked away, said nothing, did nothing. The supervisor, of course, defended the people. But here's the thing. I'm a spiritual man, and I know it. In the real life world, if you went on like, a news channel today, they'd say, well, in Democrat-run woke states run by, minority women, you're never going to get a fair shake at trial. They protect the criminal more than the victim. I can see that part in the bureaucracy from every level of government I dealt with for hours a day to start every one of my days and end days in defense of my dad. Okay? There is that. And there's also was like this invisible spiritual power that was like preventing everything from me and my dad being together. Okay? Which is all he and I wanted. He wanted to have his life saved. That's what he wanted. He wanted out. The last time I saw my dad in person, we hugged. He cried like a baby. He didn't want to leave me and go back to her. Okay? That's the last time I hugged my dad when he was alive and saw him. I can still see his face outside that hotel, crying. But of course, ruthless and relentless this woman was and is. How much so do I know? The deception, the deceit, the pain, the disgrace, the disrespect. And again, she's got 4 cohorts and culprits with this. And it's my father's daughters. And again, my father, and he had occasion to do this. I'm sure he did it once or twice with me, but not in the last 2-3 years of life. Every message, and I've got 700 of them like this at least. My father loves me, proud of me, wants to see me. We talked about everything in life. That's the only contentment I have, is even though we are, I can't say how long we talked, when we talked, because, I don't know the court process of it. But again, I've had bad criminal defense. I've seen bad, deceitful judges. Her, obviously, her siblings, his own second-born son. I mean, I never saw anything like it in my life. I knew I was fighting against evil to keep my father alive, including my own evils. I'll admit there were times where I was just like, you know what? I'm tired, Dad. And I was like, I would go watch, do something to distract myself. Sometimes I'd commit sins, sinful things to just, like take the pain away and do whatever, not against him and not against her. I mean, but just to, ease, I mean, whatever, I'm just saying, so just to ease the pain psychologically, when you're a victim, it's hard to hear somebody crying every day and in pain and hurting and wanting to get away from somebody, and they can't do anything about it, and they become more and more lonely. And my father knew he was mentally declining, although he was fine with me, like I said. When, you leave somebody in a room alone at a little desk and they'd have nothing to do all day and nobody to talk to. That's my father begged to talk to people. In regards to his daughters, most of the times, I mean, he'd be grateful to get to go see one or talk to one. But my father didn't have very many positive things to say about any of his daughters, when I had spoken to him. He didn't have very many positive things to say at all. And he would say that anyway, he wanted attention. He was in need. It wasn't being selfish. He earned it. He deserved it. He should have been taken care of. None of us, including me first, took care of him as good as he should have, because I knew he needed to be saved. It was my responsibility, but I know I did the hardest of anybody. And I don't want to live, of course I don't want to live with the guilt that I failed him, but I'm willing to, because if I am guilty, because I didn't save the man. He should have lived longer. Of course he was going to die from something at some time, but not the way he died. So having said that, I got maybe 11 more minutes here to relay what's happened. So again, my father wanted to get away. I mean, felt he was treated like a dog. I heard him, he'd get the plate of food in the morning and maybe get fed at night, I guess, again. Sometimes. Now, when she was away Monday through Friday, that's when he would become, the most lonely, the most discontent. Even my own dad, who was never this way, I have many messages, and when we did converse about him wanting to actually kill himself, going through a glass window, slitting his throat, standing in front of a car in the road. My dad was the love life. Never would ever talk about or think about killing himself. Ever. Ever. Until these things got worse with her. And again, it wasn't some mental decline that was, she tries to put with her narrative. Her narrative is like, you know what? He's got Alzheimer's. He's lying. He's mentally ill. He's demented. No, how about he's telling the truth and you are doing what you're doing? Because I've heard it and witnessed it, and I'm not a liar, and I'm not mentally ill, and I'm not demented. Okay, but I have to suffer from the same depression, the same anger that my father has, the same betrayal by those who are supposed to love him, his children, and those who are supposed to serve and help and save him. Even a couple of, his friends failed him. He had basically one friend that I know of who was there speaking to him the day, Good Friday, as it were, which is kind of when I knew, and I was told, you know what, I was hoping my father would call me, and my father was hoping I would call him. But of course, we had to fight against all this court stuff, because I couldn't, if I were to see my father and somebody saw me and sort of, quote unquote, ratted me out, her always trying to do it, or and sometimes I'd become paranoid about if I was trying to or wanted to see my father, or fearful, even just to call him. I mean, I don't know all the legality of it, but like I told my dad, I said, Dad, if I go to jail, I can't protect you. I can't see you, enjoy each other, let alone protect you. And, I'll have no contact with you, and I'll probably end up dead. So I told my dad, I said, Dad, I'll do anything for you. I'll go to jail for you, but only if you're alive. And now I say to myself today, I'm like, I was going to end it with saying this, but I'll say it. I'll wait and say it. But anyway, so in the 9 minutes I have left here prayerfully, I'll say what I'm going to say. Is that, so my dad is begging to get out. So thankfully a friend got to see him. Now, again, it was on the weekends that my dad was it was most perilous for him that he knew, because she had to be there. Now, the good news is he had somebody around the house. He just the presence of somebody. The bad news is she'd do her thing, he'd do his own thing. Not that he wanted to, or she'd disallow him something. Even, his wealthy son Joseph sent him, when she got money from him, and he put this in a message. My father didn't get to see that money. She used it on everything she wanted to, and then if, all he did was eat. He didn't do anything. If he wanted to go somewhere, yeah, he paid for it. If he, that got paid for. If they went out to dinner, he paid for it. But then she would control all the money. My father couldn't even get the brand of root beer he wanted. A generic brand she kept buying to save pennies. I heard her berate him, deny food from him, all of it. All of it. Classic IPV, they call it, intimate partner violence. Whether it was verbal, emotional abuse, physical abuse, all of it. So, again, so on Friday, I'm told that his friend got to see him, and they loved talking to him, and they had a cup of coffee. But again, my dad was still struggling, and I knew something was coming up, with Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter. I knew in my heart that God had told me about 2 months earlier something was going to happen spiritual with my dad. So, and he was probably going to die. That was going to be it. So I was still waiting and hoping and praying my dad would call me, because I was under pressure from this order. He's under pressure from the order. It was supposed to expire. It was supposed to expire in November of 2024. She's always on control and command about it. The government, they're evil 90% of the time. Law enforcement, 90% of the time. Nobody believes. His own children deceived my father, told my father, just were misled by her, disrespected, disgraced my dad. And so Holy Saturday comes in the Catholic faith, And now she's alone with him. Just think of it. She's alone with him. Okay? The next thing I know, I understand, is that an ambulance was called. And he's rushed to the hospital. All of a sudden, he's, on a respirator or whatever. He's in a coma or going comatose. He's in pain, something with his stomach. He starts throwing up, chokes on his own vomit, infects his lungs. I get one attempt, not multiple attempts. One attempt apparently from a family member on Saturday, then who was opened with on Saturday, then and couldn't get through to me. I had to later I found out it was because I blocked their call because they weren't helping my dad enough. I'm grateful that they did it on this day. Sunday, one calls her main follower, okay, the person who really destroyed my dad. As far as his family member goes, beside, this woman he was with her disrespectful attitude. I told, I hung up her, she got to go from hell, which I tell people to the spirit, not the person, to the spirit to go to hell, that she would, my dad's last dying day, talk to me like a dog, which is no surprise. I'm a strong man, or at least I was, and they talk to me that way. What do you think they're going to do to this poor older man? So finally I got through to my dad. I don't know what he heard or didn't hear. I don't know what he heard or didn't hear. I talked to God about it. I talked to Dad about it. I just had to say what I had to say. And I know how much my father loved me, and I ended with it in a prayer with him, which we ended, any conversation that we had, we ended in prayer. And the next thing I know, my dad is gone. Now again, I'm glad, I guess I'm not being tearful about this, and I'm not even being angry. I'm just describing. My dad told me, I got one of the last messages I got from my dad is like 2 or 3 of Mark, I think she's poisoning me. I feel like I'm doped. I'm tired. Not even tired. He didn't even use the word tired. He said, I'm in fear, Mark. She's going to murder me. I'm in total fear. He's left me 700 messages in 2 to 3 years. Police reports were filed. I wrote to police agencies. Here's what happens in partner violence. Somebody is going to die. Somebody is going to get killed. There's going to, they did nothing. Now, I know my father was 91, but my father was in good health. He didn't have anything diagnosed critical or terminal. He just got a new pacemaker 3 or 4 months earlier. He was always in good health, always more youthful than his age. He didn't drink. He didn't do illicit drugs. He didn't, he wasn't obese. He was healthy and full of energy. So again, I wrote to police agencies. You know what she says in court? That's harassing. That I'm writing police agencies to protect my dad 2 months before he dies. That's harassing. I know now police reports were filed after he died. But of course, you can't get police records. She has power of attorney. You can't get police records. So I said, Dad, I didn't say Dad, he's gone. My father's gone. But I know police, reports were filed. Why doesn't somebody do an autopsy? There's a crime here. My father could have been one. I mean, I'm only saying, I'm alleging, I guess is maybe what I have to say. But my dad can't speak now for himself. But on Saturday was often a time they would fight. I mean, there's a record in St. Peter's Hospital, I think, where he perished. But there's a record somewhere where she threw him down and broke his ribs. And ended up, he had to go to the hospital. That's on the record. I mean, there's police reports about the domestic violence. She's alone with him on Saturday. Okay? He could have been punched in the stomach. He could have been thrown down. He could have been poisoned. He goes in, he's vomiting like a dog, choking on his vomit, gone within 24 hours. Nobody does an investigation. No autopsy, no investigation, nothing. So in the time I have left here, because I've gone over, apparently the protection order is still in place. Right? I'm a violent threat to her. I travel across the country rushing at great expense to be by my dad's side. I get to the hospital at St. Michael's, and I've written some of this. A police officer shows up. A cousin of mine who, I don't know, says he's a man of God, is there to protect me. I don't know for sure. I mean, I pray to God he's telling the truth. But I'm going to be arrested for violating the order against this person, his caretaker, as she described herself, his caretaker, who put the order in place in writing because my father wanted my father to divorce her, when it was my dad's idea all along. I'm the one who told my dad. I said, Dad, Dad wanted to strike back against her. I said, Dad, don't hit her, don't hurt her, don't kill her, don't do anything, Dad. Don't. Let's just get away. We're not those kind of men. And he followed my advice. I go to the church. My dad is dead in a coffin. I'm allowed to see him for 10 minutes. I'm allowed. They're doing me a favor. I can't attend his service. I can't attend his burial because they're worried about her. Me, who's basically running out of money. She, who's got a house, a car, house paid in cash. My dad says at least $1 million of his money she's pilfered through the year. I sent my dad $5,000 she got in the last year alone, at least. She's got all the money. What I say in the beginning, follow the money. She's got all the money. She's got the house. She's got the power. She's got the control. She's got life and at least some joy in her heart. Probably more than ever because now she doesn't have to take care of my dad. She doesn't have to feed him a plate of food in the morning, at night, and run around and gallivant, my father would say, and do whatever she does and have a whole life. My father's gone. I can't go to the funeral. I'm the one they need to protect. Now, I get it now. They'll tell you know what? Yeah, there's a protection order, before the guy died. The guy's mad at the guy's wife. Maybe he'll go take out, an act of vengeance on her. But no, I never did, and I wouldn't because I don't give a damn. She's evil. You can't kill the devil. And I don't kill human beings. But I don't want to be killed. I don't want to be jailed falsely, and I don't want to commit suicide in jail. Especially now, often, even more in some ways, that my father's not alive. I'm more at danger and risk. The ransom has been paid, and he's dead. People didn't care about my father when he was alive. You think they're going to care about him when he's dead? And they sure as hell didn't care about me when he was alive. You think they're going to care about me when he's dead? I only got some grace by some police officer telling me, oh, we're doing you a favor letting you see your dad like this. Really? You're doing me a favor? Go to hell, him and the funeral director. How dare them say that to me? You think that's what my dad wanted? You disgrace and disrespect him, of course you're going to do the same to me. I don't give a damn about me. I'm not surprised to have expected it. I don't get to eulogize my dad. Well, I'm eulogizing him now. But I'm putting this out there. Why? My dad wanted her in jail. I didn't care what happened to her. My dad, and I can't tell you everything, but I had to protect her from my dad at times. Not because he would kill her. Not because he just simply wanted to defend himself, because he even just spoke that way. I said, Dad, don't even talk that way. Don't let her evil have you change your heart. You're a good, godly man. You're a man of peace. It's so obvious. It's unbelievable. That's how I know it's the devil. It's unbelievable. It's so obvious. It's so opposite of what the truth is. So now I don't know what my situation is. I'm out on the lam again, I guess. If it's harassment if I report on this. What do I want? Just what my father wants, truth and justice. Whether she gets imprisoned or not, I don't know. I don't give a damn. My dad's dead. That's what matters. She probably should be in jail. His wealth gone. Change the funeral plans on him. Who knows what's going on with last will and readings and things to that effect. My dad didn't have any money anyway. I don't give a damn about the money. I never did. He's my dad. Now you hear my righteous anger. Wouldn't you be angry if this happened to your dad? when he was alive and now that he's passed. The expression is rolling in the grave. You know what words I keep hearing my father say? I'd rather be alive and happy. And even if he had heaven to look forward to, I know my dad, he loved life so much, he'd rather be alive and happy than be in heaven. But he called it his purgatory. He knew it was his, he said, Mark, this is my purgatory. And he suffered the last 2 or 3 years of his life. He suffered in every possible means. So nobody knows where anybody is, whether in heaven or hell. I don't think my dad is in hell. He might be in another form of purgatory that the Catholic Church used to teach about. And maybe he's in God's hands. Because I know after I went there and I prayed over his body, I'm not surprised there was an earthquake in New York, which you don't ever hear. And I don't know where my dad went, but that's a sign some prayer was heard. Something happened with my father. I can only pray to God it's positive. But I don't know. I don't need to know. All I know is God knows. But what I also know is that man was a victim. And that I can find some solace in because he was more crucified than I could ever have imagined because of the way they crucified him and me. So he was more of a victim than ever. And victims and innocents tend to go to heaven. So in the end, I'll say this in 6-7 minutes over. I made mistakes too. I should have saved my dad. He should have lived longer. We had plans. We had more life to live. Him, and I don't know how long mine is going to be. I just don't know. I don't doubt. I know the devil's still and always after me. And a lot of this, I think, was the devil's way of coming to kill me. Because he took from me the thing that I lived for, which was my dad. Nobody had the relationship me and my dad had. Nobody cared about each other the way he and I did. Nobody. No father and son could possibly love each other as much as me and my dad did. I can guarantee that. I adored and loved my dad. I failed him a bit. I know I did. Because I didn't save him. He's not alive. He's not with me. I could have done some. I know I have regrets. I apologize to him. I apologize to God. But to be falsely accused, lied about, and suffered the way my dad and I did, the disgrace and the disrespect at his own funeral, those people ran my father into the ground. All of those people. Everybody but me, in a sense, and his friend. So I'll leave by saying this. You know how I know I made a mistake? Here's how I know. Because I would rather be in jail and have my daddy be alive than for me to be free and have my daddy be dead. I just wanted to be alive. He deserved it. I just wanted my daddy to be alive.